What's up, everybody? You're watching the 10After7 podcast on YouTube with your host, Cody Stephenson. Today, this isn't going to be a podcast about sports. Quite frankly, I couldn't care less about what's going on in the sports world. What's more important is what we have going on in the real world, and it's time to talk about it. To be honest, on Sunday, when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about this week regarding sports, what commissioners are coming out and talking about when their sport's coming back, I came to the conclusion that, you know what, I'm just going to take the week off. Doesn't feel right. All the protests going on the news. I'm bummed out. I'll just pick it up next week. I would have been a coward if I did that. I would have been turning a blind eye to the conversation that we're so afraid to discuss. People with my color skin. We're afraid to talk about it. That's the honest truth. I'm not qualified to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it. Probably no one really cares what I have to say about it, and that's fine. But it's a conversation I have to have with myself. If I really did take the week off and just jump back into this thing a week later and act as if nothing happened while we have this stuff going on in the real world, I would have been a fraud. And if no one listened to this podcast again, I wouldn't blame you. Let's start with Blackout Tuesday. It was what you posted on social media today. Black tile. Put it on your page. And I think it worked. Growing up in the social media age, how many different times can you go back to? Especially Facebook. They always gave us a filter that we could throw up on our picture. And that was our job. We felt like we were doing our part by just throwing our picture up there. Maybe had a flag on it. Some saying about being in solidarity with that country. Or person. Or people. But this one was different. I think if you were like me, you took a look at yourself and said, you know what? This is much bigger. It can't just be another trend on social media. It can't. Early in the morning, my Instagram group message with all my buddies, the conversation had already started. What is this going to do? What's the purpose? We all decided to put it up. It started a conversation in there. And I think what made it powerful was all the links that are being posted afterwards. Petitions to sign, pages to donate to, organizations to donate to, black-owned businesses that you should go to and help out. If you felt the same way I did, you wanted to take the next step. This was not going to be another trend. And I think that's important. I think our generation had been through so many different hashtags. So many different filters. But what did it actually do? This one made us take that next step. The importance of it. Voices were being heard. Yes, you might have just thrown it up to let people know you're in solidarity with those who are protesting. But I hope you did take the next step. As easy as pushing a link, donating money, signing your name. It went forward. And the conversation is continuing. It's not my place to say whether it worked or not, but I felt it was my obligation to take it a step further. And I think a lot of other people, including my friends, did that. For the first time, there was no BS in those group texts. No. There were links. Hey, here's an easy one. You just write in your name, city, state, email, send it. So Blackout Tuesday, I felt good about it. When it comes to the protest, I stand with those people who are protesting for the justice of George Floyd. Police brutality. They're peaceful. I've had friends go. Today, my friend went with his girlfriend. Thousands of people showed up at the LAPD headquarters. He said it was peaceful. They marched for a couple hours, left when they saw the National Guard come in, which I think people have a problem with. But I think they're there because you have to separate protesters, what they're protesting, and then the looters who come in afterward, after the curfew. Please separate those two. The looters have nothing to do with what the protesters are fighting for out there. I saw an interview on the news. The guy just said he was trying to get his, whatever that means. And they even asked them on the spot, are you fighting for what these protesters are fighting for? He said, nah, not really. Terrible. Looters, I can never get behind that. It's disturbing to watch those people walking out of stores with surfboards, boxes of shoes in hand. That needs to stop. And I think that's why the National Guard was put in. We've seen the very powerful videos of cops taking knees with the protesters, some putting their weapons down, walking with the protesters. That's strong. And the best thing about these protests, every different color skin you can imagine, every different race is marching for the same reason. And I stand with those people. I 100% am behind it. Protesting is the way to go. And their voice will be heard. They're going to keep on going out there. And I think it's great, actually, that we don't have sports to distract us in these times. Because the conversation is on the forefront, and it's going to be at the forefront for a while. No distractions. But do not let the message get twisted. Protesters, looters. You can get behind one and not the other. It's simple. And I think most of us can agree on that. No one's for looters breaking these buildings, burning down buildings of cities to get a point across. They're not trying to get a point across. They're taking advantage of an opportunity, and the most damage being done is the message possibly getting twisted. We're not going to let that message get twisted. No way. The same thing happened. Think back to Colin Kaepernick, who protested by taking a knee during the national anthem before a football game. In the same way, his message got twisted. He even talked to an ex-military teammate who said, maybe not sit down, take a knee, it's more respectful. And the message became, that's so disrespectful to the country, to the flag. What is he doing? He's doing what these people now, years later, are still fighting for on the streets. And that's the problem. This fight has fallen on deaf ears. People are upset, rightfully so. They want justice. They want to put an end to police brutality. This is years in the making. Years. And it's not going to stop until the voice is heard. So I'm all for these protests continuing. Keep marching. And it makes me feel uncomfortable because I have family in law enforcement. People who are out there on the other side of these protests. And I'm in fear. I see beer bottles being thrown, bricks being thrown. And I know they're good people. And until I get that text that they're home and safe with their family, and then they have to go back out the next day. There's a lot more good cops than there are bad. But here, I agree with Chris Rock. Some jobs simply can't have bad apples. And law enforcement absolutely, positively needs to be held to a higher standard. You can't afford bad apples in that industry because lives get lost, like George Floyd. If that officer, if they just looked at the bad rap he had beforehand, I think 12 different accounts, he would have been fired on the spot. No questions asked, fired on the spot. And George Floyd would still be alive. I do believe all those officers should be charged. If you have any tiny ounce of empathy in your body, when a human being says he can't breathe, you step in. You push that cop that had his knee down on his neck over and say, hey, what the fuck are you doing here? They all played a part. And a life got lost because of a bad apple. And no more bad apples should be in the police and law enforcement. You want change. We want change in law enforcement. Be held to a higher standard. Learn how to walk in the shoes of others. I think about the time when I was at a park at 10:30, 11 p.m. at night, me and my buddy. And two cops pulled up on us. Tapped on our window, asked us why we're there, started making jokes. And today I thought, for the first time I thought, wow, how different would that have been just by the color of my skin? That should never be the case, ever. And today was the first time I thought about it. I'm still learning. I need to learn. And I've heard athletes go on numerous podcasts and talk about that conversation. And I will never understand, but I will try to understand. And when they speak about this conversation, it doesn't fall on deaf ears. They talk about how they either had to sit their children down or they were sat down by their parents and have the conversation of what to do when a police officer approaches you. Me and you didn't have that conversation. Not us. Our parents just let us go. Be respectful. But their conversations go to a whole nother level. That bad apple we're talking about, one move in the wrong direction, and that bad apple can make a decision that ends someone's life. Split second, because of the color of your skin. That's why people are on the streets right now, protesting. Because for years, the same thing is happening. How many hashtags can we name off that we've lived through? I remember the Miami Heat. After Trayvon Martin was killed, all wore hoodies, silent protest. Years later, still fighting the same fight. I support law enforcement officers. I'm telling you, a lot more good than bad. But we can't afford the bad anymore. There has to be a systematic change. No longer can there be bad apples in law enforcement. And I'm kind of in a weird, I feel in a weird position. Like I should be taking a stance, but I don't think there's a stance here to take. I'm for the protesters. 1,000% behind the protesters. I also support law enforcement. That's who I call. But I understand, or I can try to understand. Put myself in those shoes. Those athletes who talk about that conversation. No one ever wants to have that conversation. They shouldn't be having that conversation because of the color of their skin. It's wrong. So I hope the protests go on peacefully. I hope there's more videos of the cops joining in, marching with them. And I hope the looters put an end to it. Because Steven Jackson, who grew up with George Floyd, former NBA player, he's still in Minnesota right now, fighting for the justice for his friend. And he even said, the looters, they're doing wrong to George Floyd's name. He would have never wanted that. Ever. And I'm here to tell you that message is not twisted. Protesters, looters. And we could still support the law enforcement who put it on the line every single day. every day. I hope my family comes home safe. I hope everyone comes home safe. These protests are empowering. And I hope 4 years from now, we won't have them anymore. But I'm glad today with Blackout Tuesday, the conversation took another step. I looked at myself and said, I need to learn. I got years to learn. But I needed to have this conversation with myself. No one wants to hear what I have to say. That's cool. But if I came back to this podcast and acted as if nothing happened, I would be a fraud. An absolute fraud. Justice should be had for George Floyd. There needs to be an end to police brutality, a systematic change in law enforcement. And I just had to get that off my chest. I hope you guys continue to listen to the podcast. It will be back. But I am happy. I'm really happy that sports is not happening right now. Because we have all the time to push this conversation forward. And if anyone wants to come on this podcast, leave a message below. I'd like to learn more. I want to learn more. Please, message me if you ever want to come on this podcast to talk about anything. It's a free space. I hope you guys join me in the next podcast, whenever that may be. Thank you for listening. I'm out. Be safe. Love you all.